Great, thank you, Josh. I want to start by thanking everyone for joining this meeting and also for your ongoing interest in our Clean Heat Standard stakeholder process. I'll start by just introducing the team we have here from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. First, my name is Will Space, and my title is Senior Technical Advisor for Climate Programs. I have several of the technical staff working with me on this project will be joining me today doing most of the presentation. I have Joshua Cook, Emily Lamb, and Angela Parnay. I'm going to turn it over to Emily right now for some opening instructions.
Yeah, so just to go over some Zoom meeting logistics quickly, as Josh mentioned, the meeting is being recorded, and to minimize background noise, all attendees are on mute, and we ask that you remain on mute during the presentation. We'd also ask that you enter your full name and affiliation if relevant in the participants panel. So if you need to rename yourself, you can select the participants panel at the bottom and then hover over your name to change your name. And then on the next slide, we'll talk about how to participate in the meeting. So the latter half of the meeting will be focused on answering clarifying questions and also hearing your comments and other questions. If you would like to ask a question or provide a comment, you can use the raise your hand function, which is again in the participants panel on the bottom right. And after you raise your hand, we'll ask you to unmute yourself and you can make your comment. You can also put comments or questions in the chat if you'd like, although we do ask that you wait to do that until we're done with the presentation. We may address your comment during the presentation. So it just helps us manage things better. With that, I'll hand it back to Will.
Great, thanks, Emily. So just to give you a general plan for the evening, we're going to spend a few minutes at the beginning with some general updates and some of the logistics we already did. We're going to talk then, the point of this meeting is to talk about our option for a voluntary early registration program for full electrification projects under the Clean Heat Standard. And we'll then allow some time for questions and comments at the end. And I'll use this time to emphasize the most important thing that Emily mentioned about the logistics is it does help us to run the meeting more efficiently if you wait to type questions into the chat until we've had a chance to go through the presentation, just in case something gets answered along the way. Next slide. So we're not going to go kind of back to square one as far as our background in this presentation, but just as a reminder for people, the Clean Heat Standard is a concept that's been under discussion in Massachusetts for quite some time now, including two different iterations of the Massachusetts Clean Energy and Climate Plan and also a report from the Massachusetts Commission on Clean Heat. And out of those documents, MassDEP was tasked to developing a clean heat standard that's practical, cost-effective, and equitable in its implementation. So I'm going to turn over most of the presentation to my colleagues Emily and Angela, and I'll turn it over right now to Emily. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to provide a little bit of context and reminder of what is a clean heat standard. So a clean heat standard is a regulatory program that would require heating energy suppliers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions over time. And the companies that would be regulated under a clean heat standard are the suppliers of heating oil, propane, natural gas, and electricity. And these companies would demonstrate greenhouse gas emissions reductions by holding clean heat credits. At the end of last year in November, we released a draft program framework that addresses key policy design topics for a clean heat standard in Massachusetts. The four main sections of that are here on the right of the slide, include setting the standard, which companies are regulated, credit generation, and then compliance, flexibility, and revenue. At the same time that we released the draft program framework, we also released straw regulatory language for a voluntary early registration program, which will be the focus of today's meeting, and we'll talk about a little bit later. But first, I'm going to take a few minutes to go through our stakeholder process. So we've been holding regular virtual community meetings every 4 to 6 weeks, roughly. The content of these meetings is for a general audience, and there's built-in time for questions and comments. We have the next set of meetings already scheduled for early March, so you can register for those on our website. In addition to the virtual community meetings, we've been holding technical sessions on program design that go into more technical detail. And we've held a series of those, including one on the draft program framework last December. On the next slide, we can talk about some of the resources that we have available for stakeholders. So we have our website that we've recently reorganized and updated so that it's a little bit easier to navigate. And on the website, you can find information about program development, background on the Clean Heat Standard, stakeholder meetings and input, including past comments and summaries of the comments that we've received so far. You can sign up for updates on the Clean Heat Standard, our email list. Like I mentioned, there's also slides and recordings from all of our past stakeholder meetings up on the website. And there's information about the heating fuel emissions reporting regulation that's currently proposed. So next I'll talk about next steps. So we're currently accepting comments on 2 different topics. First, on the voluntary early registration program discussion draft that we'll be talking about this evening. We're asking for written comments by February 16th. And then the heating fuel emissions reporting regulation has been formally proposed. And so there's an official public comment period open on that with comments due by February 23rd. And there were public hearings on that earlier this week. Like I mentioned, we're going to continue to hold virtual community meetings. So the next ones are scheduled for early March. And I also just want to emphasize that we're continually updating the FAQ document that's on our website. So that's a good place to check back for information as we address stakeholder questions. And with that, I will hand it over to Angela.
Thanks, Emily. So we'll start off with a quick overview. The Clean Heat Standard Voluntary Early Registration Program is an early action program that aims to set up the full electrification crediting procedures for a future Clean Heat Standard. Today, we'll be going over the discussion draft language that we released last fall. And at this point, this is not a proposed regulation. So in this program, owners of clean heat systems would register and qualify for full electrification clean heat credits, or checks, after installing heat pumps as their home's primary heating system. The projects that qualify for this early action program may receive administrative benefits in generating emission reduction checks once the full electrification or the full clean heat standard is established. We'll start off by giving a quick overview of how a homeowner may experience the program. As a homeowner, the first step would be to install a qualified clean heat system. For this early action program, this means either putting in a heat pump in new construction or replacing an existing heating system with a heat pump that is sized to heat the entire home. The second step would be to complete a qualification application to tell us about the installation of that clean heat system. Then, once the application is complete, it would be submitted to MassDEP through the Clean Heat and Emissions Tracking System, or CHETS, at which time we would review the application. If the system's eligibility is confirmed, then the clean heat system would be added to the Clean Heat Registry. Lastly, once added to that registry, the clean heat system would qualify for full electrification clean heat credits, or checks. For any clean heat system, homeowners may choose to authorize a third party called an authorized agent to submit the information on their behalf. This can include submitting a qualification application, managing all documentation related to the program, and receiving and transferring any checks. An owner can choose an authorized agent by completing a signed agreement that the agent would submit through CHETS as part of the qualification application. As I described, the first step to participate in this voluntary early registration program would be to install an eligible clean heat system. Eligible technologies are heat pumps that are sized to act as the residence's primary heating source. These heat pumps could be air source or ground source, including network geothermal heat pump systems. To be eligible, owners of clean heat systems must both install an eligible heat pump and then either remove the pre-existing combustion space heating equipment or commit to limiting the use of any remaining equipment to system downtime, such as when it's offline for repair or servicing. This technology requirement is a subset of the eligibility requirements listed in the discussion draft language. And at this point, we're welcoming comments on both the eligibility requirements we've proposed, as well as any suggestions for additional eligibility requirements that we could consider as we continue to refine the program. And with that, I will now pass it to Emily to discuss the next steps.
Thanks, Angela. So the next step would be to complete an application. Angela mentioned earlier the Clean Heat and Emissions Tracking System, or CHETS. This would be an online platform that MassDEP is developing. It would be designed to track credit generation and ownership, and really serve as an important part of the implementation of the Clean Heat Standard. So to apply for clean heat credits or checks, the owner would submit a qualification application through CHETS. And as Angela mentioned, this could be the owner or someone acting on their behalf. The qualification application would collect basic project information, so things like the address and applicant's contact information. It would collect information about the clean heat system itself, such as the make, model, or rated capacity. It would also collect information about equity status, which is something we haven't touched on in this presentation before, but to be eligible for equity status, would need to serve a residence of consumers that are eligible for the low income discount electricity rate. And then the application would also include proof of installation, so an invoice, contact information for the contractor that installed the clean heat system, and other information that MassDEP determined was necessary. The application would also include an attestation, so a written statement that the applicant would sign that would confirm that everything in the application is true, and also commit to the eligibility requirement that Angela described. So either removing all combustion heating equipment from the home, or committing to limit use of that combustion space heating equipment to downtime of the heat pump. So after an application is submitted, MassDEP would review it and let the applicant know once it's complete. And then if eligible, we would issue a statement of qualification within CHETS, and this would state the number of full electrification clean heat credits or checks that the system would generate. And then it would be registered within CHETS itself. And after registration, on the next slide, we can talk about actual credit generation. So MassDEP would then allocate the full electrification clean heat credits to the owner or their authorized agent. So these would be created and tracked within CHETS, the online platform that I mentioned earlier. And one full electrification credit would be given for each residence served by a clean heat system. So a heat pump that was providing heat to a single home would receive one clean heat credit. If there was a heat pump servicing multiple homes, then there would be one clean heat credit per residential unit served. And then for the equity designation, any eligible CHETS would have that equity designation identified within the CHETS online tracking system. So as an example, to make that a little more concrete, if there were a 10-unit multifamily building that was being served by one clean heat system, that system would receive 10 full electrification clean heat credits. And if 3 of the occupants of that 10-unit building were on low income electric rates, 3 of those 10 credits would be designated as equity credits. And so now I'll just give a high-level recap of what we talked about. So the voluntary early registration program would register and generate full electrification clean heat credits from installing heat pumps as a residence's primary heating system. There would be a qualification application that would be submitted through an online platform called CHETS. And then after submission of an application, the owner would receive a statement of qualification and be registered within CHETS. And then the clean heat credits would be generated and assigned to the owners, again, in that online platform. And I will hand it over shortly to Will, but do want to emphasize that we're interested in comments on all aspects of this. Now I think I'll hand it over to Will.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So just as we move to the question and discussion section, I just wanted to take a minute to identify some of the particular things that we're most interested in hearing about. 2 of the topics really are about sort of eligibility. Are there other eligibility requirements that we haven't mentioned that we should be considering for the registration process. And then related, different way of looking at the same thing, there's some things that might possibly be ineligible, at least for the early action crediting. One is anything that's something or anything that's done under the MassSave program. Some people have suggested unweatherized homes wouldn't be credited, or even maybe that it would be limited to projects that meet the equity standards that we've suggested. The other general topic is we are concerned about the administrative burden, both on the applicants and also on us on the program. So we're very interested in kind of streamlining options that may help. So I'm going to turn it back over to Emily to respond to questions. Just, it may help her a little bit if you can start with any clarification questions and just hold off briefly on more substantive questions until we get to answer those. But at this point, we're open for questions and comments, I think. Right, Emily?
As a reminder, if you'd like to speak, use the raised hand function or put your question in the chat and I'll read it. Rosemary Wessel, how would this impact homes that have already installed whole home heat pump systems?
So this would not, the voluntary early registration program would be for new installations. The draft program framework that we put out last year includes two types of credits. One is full electrification, which is the full electrification of residential space heating, and the focus of this voluntary early registration program. But there's also ongoing annual emissions reductions credits in that draft framework, and that would have an option for crediting for whole home electric heat pumps that have already been installed.
Emily, I might add one nuance. I think that if the system has been installed since January 1st of 2024, we are thinking that depending on how this plays out, it may actually end up being eligible for early action crediting.
Yes, thank you.
Larry, I've asked you to unmute.
Thank you. I'm looking at slide 17. I guess first a clarification, then a comment. You've probably said this before, and I should know it, but the value of an equity credit relative to a regular check, what would that be?
So we don't have a specific value right now, but the draft program framework does establish alternative compliance payment values for regular full electrification checks at $10,000 and then equity full electrification checks at $20,000, so twice as much.
Okay, so in the example that you used, if 3 occupants were on low income electric rates, they would get equity credits that would be basically double what somebody who was not low income. Is that essentially what you're talking about in that instance?
Well, the unit that credits are tracked in is number of residences. So there wouldn't actually be more credits for equity credits, but there's a carve out in the framework under the full electrification standard so that a certain portion of that compliance obligation would need to be met with equity credits each year, which is where that ACP concept that I described earlier comes into play, but that none of that is really part of this voluntary early registration program.
Okay. And I guess just a brief point for now, it appears to me that this methodology is probably beneficial in terms of encouraging the electrification of multifamily properties, which is if a supplier is looking to earn credits, getting a full credit for an apartment, maybe 3 units, a triple decker, getting 3 credits is probably worthwhile compared to it would increase the viability of going after a triple decker in order to earn credits relative to a large single family home. And so there's probably an argument to be made that that's a pro equity move by itself. I would be considering the fact that MassSave has had difficulty serving renters over the many years. Is that part of where you're going with that idea?
Yeah, I think that's part of the concept behind, each residence gets the same amount of credit. And certainly, helpful, and happy to hear thoughts on that approach.
Okay, well, thank you. That's good enough for now.
Follow-up from Rosemary Wessel. So having installed in November 2023, I'm out of luck, or is it basically the same as what I got in Mass Save rebates?
So I think what we've suggested here and put forward here, you would not be receiving a credit under this voluntary early registration program.
Michael Duclos, in the early registration program for full electrification only, not partial electrification.
Did you read that again? Sorry, I think I didn't understand.
I misread it. So is the early registration program for full electrification only, not partial electrification?
Yes, it is only for full electrification.
Tanisha Bott, what are clean heat credits again?
So clean heat credits are an accounting mechanism to keep track of the installation of clean heat in Massachusetts. So it would be credit created and tracked within an online platform that MassDEP has created called CHETS.
Michael Duclos, if a home currently has a heat pump that is much too small to heat the whole home, and heat pumps are added with a capacity for full electrification, would that earn a full electrification credit?
I'm not sure we've fully gone through all the nuances of those situations, but if it were displacing a fossil heating system of some type, I think so. But we'd welcome comment on sort of non-traditional or more non-standard use cases that we should consider.
Chris Brennan, can you talk about how and if CHETS and equity CHETS dollar value would be determined? Who would set that, how, and by what process? Do you foresee early credits being worth more than credits in, say, 2030 plus? Thank you.
So we wouldn't set credit values. The concept is that it's a marketable credit that can be traded amongst the various parties that are interested in holding them. And I don't have information on I don't have a projection for what we think those prices would be. Well, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, I think that's right. And I think, just we're happy to have these are all great questions. We are in this meeting, really kind of focused on the mechanics of signing up the projects, with the caveat that we haven't made without a final clean heat standard regulation, we can't make any particular representation of how those credits will be used in a final program. But we did want to allow this opportunity just to make clear that we do intend to, assuming there is a program that has the aspects we're talking about, have a way for projects that are earlier before the start of it to qualify. So in addition to, we're not sure, it's also a little bit beyond the scope of this particular discussion.
I'm not seeing any additional hands or comments in the chat right now. So as a reminder, if you'd like to speak, please use the raise hand function or indicate in the chat or write any comments in the chat. Larry, I've asked you to unmute.
Thanks. Will, I want to pick up on something you just said. I just was perhaps suggesting that you try to make it a little clearer on the slides or something, but I think what you're getting at is right now DEP's in this process that's been inviting stakeholder comment as you go through different ideas, different parts of the framework, and you get asking us for feedback, and you keep tweaking the concept. Is the idea that eventually you're going to move to a regulatory process, and then at the end of that, you'll declare that the clean heat standard will become a rule effective on a certain date to be determined. You can't do it today. You'll have to run through the process. But then this voluntary registration program would potentially enable people to start earning credits from like some announcement date that precedes the date that it's officially a standard. Is that where you're going with this?
Yeah, I think one option is we actually go through a separate rulemaking to create this optional program so that we have the rules really set before anybody would sign up. But another option is the one that you said, where we're just making clear that credits that projects have, when we finalize the regulation, we would clarify that you can apply sort of retroactively for projects back to a date. We're kind of trying to honor a concept that's been a lot of kind of crediting programs that you want to not send a signal for people that they should kind of wait to do something until the program becomes in place. And we're struggling with that. And then on the other side, we can't make any formal specific project promises about what the final regulation will look like. So that's kind of the other side of it. Does that help?
Yeah, in general, I very much appreciate the idea that you don't want both consumers and installers to sit on their hands and then have a rush on, you certainly, there's enough interest right now in electrification that you want to encourage people to continue forward on that. I guess I'll say, I know you're talking about full electrification here. It does make perfect sense to try to focus on that, but I will follow up on Michael Duclos's point, which is there are a whole bunch of people out there who have, in good faith, who have installed a heat pump. Maybe they have forced hot water and they're using ductless mini splits to heat part of their home, and then you want them to go all the way forward. So you probably do want to consider that configuration a little bit more in this context. My house is one of those kinds of houses, which is it's easier to envision doing the heat pumps partially a couple of times rather than all at once. And I think there's a lot of people like that. The other point I would make is I just want to keep encouraging DEP to consider providing credits to heat pump water heaters, to induction stoves, and to clothes dryers that meet Energy Star standards. Those all displace fossil fuels, and they're fairly easy to work into the program. I think that it makes sense to diversify the supply chain of how we're going to decarbonize. So I know you're probably thinking about focusing on heat pumps for some level of simplicity to your work in the first couple of years, but I think to me it's a stronger argument to broaden it to at least one more of those technologies besides space heat. Thanks.
Tanisha Bott, sorry if this was already answered, but how is this different than what is offered by MassSAVE?
So I think that's maybe a question about more broadly what the clean heat standard is, which, as Will mentioned at the start, is sort of a policy to targeting emissions from the building sector. It's been identified through a variety of Massachusetts climate planning processes. And this voluntary early registration program is specifically focused on one portion of that clean heat standard, which is the full electrification concept. But having said that, we do recognize that there is overlap with MassSAVE, and we are particularly interested in stakeholder feedback on how we can best make our work complementary to the existing work going on in MassSAVE.
And I would add to that, one of the big differences between a clean heat standard and a MassSAVE is the clean heat standard can set a target or a stringency out far into the future, which can help the industry and the homeowners to think in more longer terms, whereas MassSAVE works on the 3-year planning schedule. So as Emily mentioned, we're trying to think of ideas for kind of reconciling those programs, but we do think there's a separate role in the longer term standard setting for the clean heat standard.
I'm not seeing any other hands or comments in the chat right now.
Maybe while we're waiting, we should move on to the last slide there briefly. So this has some information about where to submit written comments and information about get to our website. There's a phone, camera link for signing up for further updates, and you can also find that on the Clean Heat Standard webpage. And I think what's the comment deadline again?
Yeah, we're asking for comments by February 16th.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, I think if we don't have anything else in the chat and anybody else waiting to speak, we're ready to finish it up for the evening. Emily or Josh, am I missing anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, well then, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. We appreciate all of your input. Good night.